Hello, everyone, and welcome to the concession stand here on the KB Radio Network. I am your host, Kevin Reed, and this is the review of Prime Video's new buddy cop action comedy, The Wrecking Crew, starring Dave Bautista and Jason Momoa. In this film, they play two half brothers, one a loose cannon cop, played by Momoa, and a disciplined Navy SEAL, played by Dave Bautista. They must work together to unravel a conspiracy behind their father's murder in Hawaii. When I watch a film on streaming, whether it's a comedy or an action film or a science fiction film, whatever the genre, I always look at it from a different prism than I would of a theatrical release, if you will. Whether that's fair or unfair to the filmmakers or the film itself, I really don't know, but I kind of look at it differently because I feel if it was good enough, it would be in the theaters, so I kind of temper my expectations going in. Well, it's just a streaming movie, something that you probably put on in the background while you're cooking or doing other chores around the house or putting it on late at night while you're in the bed just so you can fall asleep or something to that effect. And that's the prism I look at streaming movies. Now, we've got some really great streaming movies, whether it's on Netflix, Prime Video, Peacock, whatever. There have been some good movies that you can look at and be like, man, they should have put that out in the theater. Is that good of quality or that good of a story or whatever the case may be. When I first saw the trailer for The Wrecking Crew, I was like, yep, straight to streaming. this is a Prime Video special. That's what I felt when I saw the trailer. And then I sat down and watched the movie. And I was wrong. This should have been in the theater. I should have been watching this movie with a bag of popcorn or bag of Twizzlers and a Coca-Cola, surrounded by 50 to 60 other communal participants in the theater enjoying this film. This was a good movie, a really good movie. And I kind of waited to review this because I wanted to let it sit a while. Like, did I really see what I really saw? Now I'm not saying look for this towards the end of the year during Oscar buzz or anything. I'm not going that far with it, but it's a really good movie that had no business being this good. And granted, it does contain two big stars with Jason Momoa and Dave Bautista. They are really good actors, been a part of blockbuster films themselves. They know how to keep you entertained. And so I shouldn't have been too shocked by that, but the dynamic between these two actors, and this isn't the first time they appeared on screen together. They were in Doom together, even though they didn't share too many scenes in that film. They were in that Apple TV Plus series C, which was pretty good, and they were in that together. But they never were together until this film, in this buddy cop format. And this is a genre that came to prominence in the late 80s or mid 80s to the 90s, where we saw a whole bunch of buddy cop films. Lethal Weapon is like the godfather of buddy cop films. And so this is a genre or a subgenre in action that I'm deeply fond of, and we don't get a lot of them these days. And so to revisit this subgenre with these two behemoth of human beings, and and they playing brothers nonetheless. Okay, let's see how they bounce off of one another, how good the chemistry are between these two. And it was perfect. It was perfect. At no point in this film did I feel they weren't actual blood brothers. They are brothers. And as a man that have a brother, had two, God rest his soul, but I know the dynamic between brothers, and that dynamic was truly there between these two, man. The bickering, the love, even with the bickering and the fight sequence they had with one another at the midway point of this film, you can still feel the love for one another, even though it was a brutal fight, very brutal. But you could still see that they were holding back just a tad because they're brothers, And I, I I enjoyed that more than the action, the story, and everything else in this film. It was the dynamic between these two. They need to really partner up and be in more films together. I feel. I'm not saying do the Wrecking Crew 2 again, even though I would support that. But just other films. These two are awesome together. I think they brought something a little extra out of each other because as much as I'm a big fan of both of these gentlemen, they are limited to a degree. Let's be real. They aren't Shakespearean trained thespians. you know, you'll never see. Well, I ain't gonna say never because anything can happen, but it's very unlikely that you'll see Jason Momoa in King Lear or Dave Bautista in a Shakespearean Hamlet or whatever. You're not going to see all that, but they are good for what they do. They are very good at these type of films. But this is some of the best I've seen of them. They really brought something out of each other that caught me off guard, man. I was so invested in these two. I could have just watched them in a comedy. The action was just lanyap. That was just a cherry on top of the sundae. This was just beautiful, man, to watch these two perform. I was all in on that. Now, with all that said, yes, the action was amazing. This was a true throwback action movie. I mean, just balls to the wall, strap in, you're in for a ride. And they really did not hold back on the action in this movie. That's part of the reason why I felt this should have been a theatrical release, because the action, like I said, streaming movies, you could tell they hold back, budgetary wise and stuff like that. You're not going to get super exciting action sequences or fight sequences and things of that nature. You did here. You did. This was some of the best action I've seen in a while. Practical wise, hand to hand combat wise, shootout wise. It was very exciting, very fun and brutal. Oh my God. They was brutal. These have some of the most brutal kills in, I would say, the last 5 to 10 years that I can think on the top of my head in an action film. But it was satisfyingly brutal. It wasn't just brutal for brutal's sake. And it had to be brutal because you got these two big bohemian human beings, you you can't just have them slapping somebody. It's got, those punches got to land, and it's got to be with some force behind it, and they did. I was all in on that. This film is directed by Angel Manuel Soto, who previous film is Blue Beetle over there at DC, which is a film I wasn't mad at. I actually like Blue Beetle. It was one of the better DCEU films that came out in that little time capsule that we had, the DCEU. I really like Blue Beetle, and he did a good job with that film. But this he graduated to one of the sought out to become one of the most sought out directors, action directors. This film was initially going to be directed by David Lynch, who, the Fall Guy and the first John Wick film and Deadpool 2 and movies, those films. But I think he got caught up. It was a scheduling thing. I think with the Fall Guy, the shoot ran too long and they had to replace him, and they replaced him with Angel Manuel Soto. And, good on him. Good on him. It still felt like '87 North film, you know, as far as the action is concerned. Um, One thing that I take away from this movie that I think about more than the action and the performances by Dave Bautista and Jason Momoa is the story. Now the story is pretty basic. Is nothing that we haven't seen before. Is pretty standard for this type of action movie. The story that they're telling here, but I love the way this film was paced. I loved how the story unfolded. You know, it wasn't too many ex machina moments where, oh, here's the evidence. You know, they just stumbled upon things. No, they really did investigative work. They really did go out there and find clues and find witnesses and find this and find that. But it was paced well, the way they did it, and I'm really impressed by how they pulled that off in the end. Good on them on that. The supporting cast was great. You know, you got Jacob Batalon, who we know from the most recent Spider-Man films as Ned. This isn't Ned that you're getting in this movie. This is a different character altogether. Morena Baccarin, she plays the girlfriend. She plays Valentina, the girlfriend of Jason Momoa. Loved her in this. And she is awesome, man. She is so underrated. You know, the fact that we all loved her character in Deadpool and how she was able to have chemistry with Ryan Reynolds and make that story work within a comic book movie was awesome. And she did it here too. You know, it's not a similar character, but there are similarities, and the way she performed in this film worked within this film, you know, to use kind of the same tropes from Deadpool, but it wasn't a carbon copy type thing, but it was just moments where I felt like, and I can't remember her character's name in Deadpool, but it was similarities between that character and this character, yet this character was more grounded than the more outlandish one that we got in Deadpool. The one character, and it is not the actor that I have a problem with, it was the fact that this actor was cast in this film, and it was so random. You know, he just felt so out of place, and that's Stephen Root, who is awesome. I love Stephen Root, but he plays a detective in here, and it's like, to be honest with you, now that I'm thinking, I think he's the only white man other than the villain, but I think he's the only other white man in this movie. Everybody else is either Asian or Samoan or Polynesian. Everybody, Stephen Root just sticks out like a sore thumb. It threw me off. He didn't give a bad performance or anything like that, but it was just, he just stuck out. You know, looking at him on screen. The biggest thing, the best thing about this movie, aside from the performance, aside from the direction, aside from the action, is the comedy. The comedy worked. It worked perfectly. I laughed so hard in this movie. And I had no bit. I wasn't expecting it to be that funny. Yeah, I was expecting to see corny jokes or hear corny jokes and whatnot, but this was funny. This movie was super, super funny, and it worked. It wasn't just comedy for comedy's sake. It was these characters. This is who he is. He's a loose cannon, and he doesn't take anything seriously. All that was set up, and it worked. It just worked the way Jason Momoa played the cow, because he was the funniest person in here. Dave Bautista had some funny moments as well, but everything as far as the comedy is concerned, I actually was like, man, this is this movie has no business being this funny. I mean, funny to the point I had to pause the movie because I couldn't hear the next line. You know, it was that type of funny, and it's all subjective. What's funny for me may not be funny for you, but it it got me. It truly got me. Now, as much as I'm glowing about this movie, I can acknowledge that this movie does have issues in areas. And those issues for me was number one, some of the visual effects shots in this film were so bad. There was an action sequence that took place on a bridge in a car chase that was so bad. I'm like, my God, they couldn't do any. I mean, I'm talking Gen 1 level special effects looking. It was like, y'all spent a penny on this movie. You can see the money on the screen. Why was it? What happened with the special effects? Did y'all not budget that right? I don't know what happened, but it was just bad. And it was a couple of moments that the CGI looked a little like, but that scene in particular was so bad. And what makes it so bad is the fact that it was an exciting scene. It was a cool action sequence, that car chase. But then you look at the visual effects shots that they cut to and hold on. They actually hold on it for a long period of time. I'm like, why are you showing this? Why are you forcing this down my throat? And it looks so bad. I was completely thrown. It took me a minute to get back into the scene, to re-engage in the film. The other bugaboo I have about the film was the villain. The villain of the film, you have two, really. Well, there's a villain and there's an antagonist. And you know who the villain is immediately. It's not even I don't know. I don't even know how to describe it, but it's so blatant who the villain is. And when it's revealed towards the end, it's supposed to be this moment, but I knew this an hour and a half ago. I knew that you knew who the villain was, but they tried to disguise it, and it just made it worse. As far as that is concerned, the main villain was so unbelievable, and I like that actor. I can't pronounce his name, but he played Dracula on the BBC series that came out. It was on Netflix as well. Love that version of Dracula. I love his portrayal as Dracula. But he's the villain in this film, and it just didn't work. The villain didn't work, unfortunately, and it kind of tore the film apart having him as the villain. But those are my only two bugaboos about the film. Other than that, this is a watch, man. If you are a action junkie, a buddy cop lover, this is the film for you, man. This is a true throwback to the 80s and 90s action films, and I had a ball. The Wrecking Crew gets a letter grade of a B. Yeah, man, this was fire. This they should have slapped this in somebody's AMC, Regal, Cinemark, wherever. This was a good time in the theater, man. Well, a good time at home, but it should have been in the theater. But that's my opinion. I would love to know yours. What did you think of The Wrecking Crew? Email the show, kbradiopodcast@gmail.com. You can also search for the show on all social media platforms. Just search for the KB Radio Network. Also, don't forget about YouTube. Subscribe to the KB Radio Network channel and like this video if you don't mind. Don't forget about the 5 stars, the reviews, and sharing this show if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you are currently listening to the concession stand here on the KB Radio Network. Everybody, thank you for joining me for this review of The Wrecking Crew, which is currently on Prime Video. Want you all to know that I love you, continue to love everyone, and until we speak again, you all be blessed.